Hello everyone, and let's close out my video making for the month of November 2018 with my Star Wars review for the month. For those of you that are wrestling fans, I know I've done a lot of non-wrestling reviews this week, but these were things that I had promised and I just wanted to get out there. So I promise wrestling videos will resume starting next week, possibly even this weekend, depending on if I have any free time. I've got a few ideas for videos I want to do before the end of 2018. I go on my Christmas break that I typically go on, but this is going to be a Star Wars review, part of my monthly series, and today we're going to be looking at yet another trilogy, the Corellia Trilogy, written by, what is his name? Roger McBride Allen, a prolific science fiction writer, and this is his big contribution to Star Wars. Now, Corellia is important in that it is a system that is home to one Han Solo, everyone's favorite smuggler, everyone's favorite pirate, one of the all-time great Star Wars characters, so iconic, brought to life by the wonderful actor Harrison Ford, and one of the most iconic characters in all of cinema. Han Solo's great. I love him. He got his own movie this year, which wasn't great, wasn't terrible, but again, it's Han Solo. We all love Han Solo, and anything with his name on it is something that's going to generate my interest at least a little bit. And unfortunately, in the expanded universe, which is where these books take place in, what is now known as the Legends timeline, I should qualify that, Han, unfortunately, they seem to struggle finding things for him to do. He always seemed to be kind of along for the ride. It didn't often take an active role in the story, unlike Luke, who was typically right in the thick of things, or Leia, who was typically running the New Republic or having some big role to play on the government side of things. Han was always just kind of along for the ride. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. So I think I made the crack once in a previous review that, Han Solo's argument that Han should have died in Return of the Jedi, it's like maybe he had a point, because writers seem to struggle to find things for him to do. But here, Han Solo, as part of a diplomatic mission on behalf of the New Republic, him, Leia, and the whole family, the kids and Chewie and everybody, they all go to Corellia to go on this diplomatic mission to improve relations between the New Republic and the Corellian system, which is 5 separate planets. And actually, the first book, which I should note, is Ambush at Corellia. That's the first book. And in this book, they really introduce us to Corellia, how it works, how the system operates, and not so much the conflict. That doesn't really come up until the very end, but most of what's in the first book is introductory. And so, all right, we're going to Han Solo's home planet. He's bound to be a major focus, and they can do something really good and really do something that's character-driven for Han and get a memorable trilogy out of it. Doesn't quite happen, and I'm not going to say that they're terrible books, but they're fairly mundane. Something that could have been really cool and something that could have been awesome ultimately becomes fairly standard Star Wars book fare and nothing overly memorable. We get a villain who could have been interesting, but ultimately doesn't amount to much. We get yet another planet buster weapon, which anybody who knows me knows that that's something I got really sick of with Star Wars. When you look at the Galaxy Gun and the Dark Saber and Centerpoint, the goddamn Sun Crusher, which was probably the worst. Starkiller Base, it was one of my knocks against The Force Awakens. So it's just an old, tired trope within Star Wars that every time it gets repeated, I just get annoyed. It was the weakest part of Return of the Jedi for me. It's like, oh, they're doing the Death Star again? I wish they had done something different. But it's, it's like the Death Star was great. They should have never tried to copy it again. And unfortunately, Star Wars had a bad habit of trying to copy the Death Star over and over and over and over again. So unfortunately, the story doesn't really go in any kind of a direction that's that interesting. And I'm about to make a very weird comparison here, but bear with me. There was an old episode of Facts of Life. Now, again, bear with me on this. There was an old episode of Facts of Life where Blair and Joe go back to New York City and they meet up with old friends of theirs and they spend the weekend with their old friends separately. And Blair's off hanging out with her friend and Joe's off hanging out with her friend. And in the course of hanging out with their friends, they find out that they are drastically different people than they were before going to the boarding school. And for those of you who've never seen The Facts of Life, I'm sorry, but this is the comparison that I'm making in my head. And trust me, I'm going to tie it back to through the books and make a point, but they find that they are drastically different people. Blair, who's hanging around with like kind of rich snobby types, finds that she's become a lot more compassionate and isn't quite as harsh as her friend is. Jo has found that she's become a lot more compassionate and isn't quite as rebellious or as disrespectful as her friend is. And I think it's probably, from the facts of life, it's probably the best episode I remember seeing from that show. And through the course of hanging out with their friends, they find out that they've completely changed as people and that they're actually the real close friends, Blair and Jo. And they need each other. There's this whole idea of like leaving your old life behind and growing into the person that you've evolved into, and which relationships you forge are really more important, and all that type of stuff. And what I was kind of hoping for with these books is like, all right, Han Solo's going back to his home system, Corellia. What I was hoping for was something similar, where maybe Han would get sucked into some smuggling game or hang out with some old crew of his or something, and get wrapped up into the piracy game again, or something like that. And through the course of it, find out, it's like, you know what? I've really grown and matured. I'm a husband now. I'm a father now. I'm an important representative of the New Republic, and I've got responsibilities, and I can't just be gallivanting around and being a smuggler. I've got to, like, buckle down and be a responsible parent and husband and representative of the Republic. So he's got, like, the Han Solo that's at this point in his life in these books, very different from where he was in A New Hope. And actually, Han Solo's development over the course of even the original trilogy is very important to the original films. And Han Solo is actually one of the more satisfyingly developed characters from the original trilogy. So I was kind of hoping that that would continue with these books, and they were going to highlight, it's like, that's whatever life he had on Corellia, that's a life that Han Solo has left behind, and he's evolved into something different. And he's a far more responsible and good-natured individual than he was back when he lived on Corellia. They do not go that route with this, and instead, the fact that this is Han Solo's home system is almost inconsequential to the story. I say almost, but because there is one family element that comes into play, but it just doesn't feel like it almost didn't have to be Corellia. It didn't have to be Han Solo's home planet, because it didn't really involve Han's character or backstory that strongly. So what happens throughout the course of the books, and I guess I'll outline the books right now. You had Ambush at Corellia, which was book 1, like I said. Assault at Selonia, which is book 2, and then the final book, Showdown at Centerpoint, to close things out. Now, what happens here is that Leia, Han, the kids, and Chewie go on this mission. Leia gets a tutor for the kids named Ibrahim, who's a fairly uninteresting character. He's okay. You think it's like, all right, a teacher character for the twins and Anakin. They could do something funny with that, but ultimately he just feels like he's there because the kids and Chewie get broken off from the main group, and the tutor is with him, and it feels like he's there and his droid is there, and he's got like an Q9. He's got like a droid that's supposed to be like R2 but can also speak basic, and it feels like they're there just to make sure it's not just the kids and Chewie talking to each other, because you've got the kids and then you've got Chewbacca who can't speak basic, so that would be really hard to write. So I almost feel like they invented those characters just to have characters speaking basic and explain what the hell is going on, and kind of keep the kids reamed in as well. But anyway, so they're all in this mission. Luke and Lando are off doing their other thing, which is one of the most bizarre subplots in any Star Wars book I've ever read, which I'm going to get into that in a bit. But anyway, all hell breaks loose on Corellia at the very end of book 1, and it's revealed that Han Solo's long-lost, deranged cousin, Thrackan Sal Solo, is become the leader of this racist faction that wants to take control of Corellia and make sure that it's a human-based system and wants independence from the Republic, and starts this whole big conflict that carries through for the rest of the trilogy. Takes Han prisoner. Chewie and the kids, they go run and hide. Leia's forced to deal with it. Mara Jade is there to she gets roped up in all the mess. And they have to deal with Thrackan Sal Solo, his armies, his groups, until it's revealed in book 3 that there is a planet-busting weapon at the Centerpoint, the Starbuster, I think it's called, or something like that. And he wants to use it as a way to threaten the New Republic and ensure Corellia's independence. Again, the idea of another planet-buster, Starbuster weapon, or whatever it's called, very tired by this point. Even by this point, that whole concept had become tired, stale, and boring, and completely pointless. It just felt like, again, they just couldn't dig themselves out of that Death Star mindset. It's like, we got to have a big ball to destroy by the story's end. But what are Luke and Lando off doing at this point? This is the weirdest goddamn thing I have probably ever read. At least as like a major plot line in a Star Wars book, and the fact that so much time was dedicated to it is just mind-boggling to me. But it felt like, again, it felt like something that was done to keep Luke out of the action, because if Luke is there, he could almost solve everything immediately, because he's become such a powerful Jedi at this point. So they needed to write him out of the situation. So he's off with Lando as a goodwill ambassador, I guess, on Lando's behalf, while Lando goes off looking for a rich wife. Yes, Lando is off looking for a honey. And why are we focusing so much time on Lando trying to land himself a rich honey? I don't know. Like, I don't care. And it's fun. It's sad because I love Luke. I love Lando. And typically in the expanded universe, that was some of Lando's best stuff. But here it's just so pointless and so meaningless, at least to me. And it largely just feels like an excuse to keep them out of it. And, you know, throughout the trilogy, when they find out what's going on, they try to fight their way back into the situation and help any way they can. But you get Luke, who's trying to help, I guess, build up Lando, would be a good mouthpiece for him to build him up to these women that he's selling himself to. One of them turns out to be what's called a life witch that siphons energy off of her husbands through some strange ritual called the blood kiss. Lando is ultimately saved by C-3PO of all people, who warns him, is like, no, that's a life witch. Oh dear God, sir, no. You will die, sir, if you marry this woman. And so there's one time you can say that C-3PO actually saved the day. He saved Lando. Which makes it even stranger how absurdly nasty Lando is to C-3PO. The way he treats the droids in this, and sometimes some writers took the racism towards the droids to this ridiculous degree. And this might be the most ridiculous I've ever seen, because to me, at the most, as far as how mean people were to droids, you did see the bartender in the original film that wouldn't serve droids, which makes sense because he's a business owner and he can't give seats to people that don't drink. So at least there's some kind of a logic to it. And then you have Han, who was kind of a dick to 3PO and Empire, but he was, but Lando and Empire was very, dismissiff of 3PO. He didn't, openly treat him like garbage. And Leia and Luke were, nice to them. They didn't, I don't think they viewed 3PO and R2 as being necessarily equals to human beings, but they did, treat them with some level of respect, or some level of, acknowledgement, if nothing else. But to see Lando be this nasty to 3PO, really, beyond what Han was in Empire. And I was just like, what the fuck is up his butt? What is going on here? And what are they doing to Lando in this book? Because he's come across one of the most likable characters in all of Star Wars is now very unlikable all of a sudden. What is going on? And I just felt bad for 3PO, especially after 3PO saved his life, and he was still a dick to him. And again, I get they were going for the whole racism towards droids thing, but they pushed it to such a degree that it was offsetting and off-putting and felt super, super forced, and was very... Not great. Wasn't a fan of that. I wasn't a fan of that whole subplot with Luke and Lando. Again, it felt like it was just there as an excuse to keep them out of the main conflict until towards the end of the story. And so you got that going on. It's weird. Lando does eventually find a woman that piques his interest, but this situation with Centerpoint and Corellia kind of distracts him from that, ultimately proving that, this whole subplot wasn't really all that necessary to begin with. Luke actually comes face to face with an old flame of his love interest from Truce at Bakura, which was a book that I have read but have not reviewed as part of the channel. I'll probably review it in the future. But as I said during the Callista trilogy, Luke having a love interest that wasn't Mara Jade typically didn't go very well, and that was one of those cases where it felt like it was super, super forced just to give Luke a love interest and for no other reason. Now, there was some intrigue there because she was an Imperial senator, and it's like, ooh, you've got like the big rebel hero and like this romance with an Imperial senator, one of the last holdouts of the Empire. So there was probably something that could have been done there, but overall, it was a romance that I didn't particularly care about. Maybe I'm just an unromantic slob, who knows. But, his previous relationship with this woman ultimately leads to them having reinforcements for the final battle, so that helps. At least there was actually a point to it and a payoff to it this time around. But, yeah, so you got everything going on with Thrak and Sal Solo. You've got Mara Jade, Leia, and Han dealing with the situation. And you've got Chewie, the tutor, and the Solo kids, who ultimately stumble onto the Centerpoint weapon, which becomes the focal point of the whole climax. And, getting control of that weapon and, Thrak and Sal Solo wanting to use it to win this conflict and gain his independence from the New Republic and yada, 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 all that stuff. And unfortunately, that's all there is to the book. If you like just straight up action adventure, I think it probably delivers that okay. Like I said, it's fairly typical of a lot of like the standard Star Wars books. It doesn't do anything that special. It doesn't do anything that helps it stand out on its own. But it is, especially when you get into books 2 and 3, it is action-packed. So if that's what you want, you could probably get something good out of that. But I've found that more of the action-heavy novels are to cover up for the fact that the story's not that great. Some of my more favorite Star Wars novels, the Thrawn trilogy, for example, the best parts of those are typically the dialogue scenes, like just Thrawn being Thrawn and the characters being the characters, Luke and Mara's interactions. That's the stuff I remember from those books. I think of Kenobi, that book, one of the last really good books from the expanded universe. Wonderful character-driven story. And it's, if they ever make that rumored Kenobi movie, I said it during my review and I'll say it now. It's like, look, just adapt that book and you're fine. You really don't have to change anything. Unfortunately, I think they'll be tempted to add a giant space battle where there doesn't need to be a giant space battle when you have this nice, more down-to-earth, down-to-earth for a Star Wars story, character-driven story. And I think you can tell like a really simple story with that. You don't have to have this big, gigantic space battle, especially in a Ben Kenobi story, because that would just be silly. But I found that it's a lot more the character-driven stories that pique my interest and keep me engaged. And unfortunately, the Corellia Trilogy had potential for a really hot setup. Had potential for some great character development for Han, where he realizes, oh my God, I've really grown a lot since I've joined the rebellion, and now that I'm part of the New Republic and gotten married and become a dad and all these other things. Instead, though, it just kind of relies on a lot of the old tropes, like the Death Star ripoff, like splitting the gang up a la Empire Strikes Back, like putting the Solo kids in danger for the 845th time. It always felt like in a lot of these books, they either put them in danger or they wrote them out of the story completely and acted as didn't act like they weren't there, but just kind of took them out of the action completely. It was like, no, they're not going to get involved, which would probably be my preference overall until they become older and become Jedi. The Solo kids just kind of like, you're just kind of taking up space at this point. But fortunately, there were better Solo children related tales in the New Jedi Order, which part 3 of the New Jedi Order reviews is going to be coming soon, at the latest by February. I might have a few other reviews I want to do ahead of it, but so that'll be coming soon. But the Corellia Trilogy, unfortunately, I think I've said all there is to say about it. I feel like I've spent more time talking about other books than the Corellia Trilogy. It's just not very good, not very interesting. But again, it's not offensively bad. I just think it was an opportunity to do something really neat and really cool and something great for Han Solo, and unfortunately, they didn't capitalize on it. So them's the breaks. But they're not offensively bad books, so if you just want straight up action adventure, they'll probably be okay just for that. But that concludes this review. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening. I will have another Star Wars review for you next month to close out 2018, but that is all I have for you right now. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all later.